The main question we should be asking ourselves is what can be done to bring the crimes and atrocities to an end. That's the crucial question. And there are two possibilities, as recognized by anyone who has any concern for the fate of Ukrainians. One possibility is to move on to facilitate the destruction of Ukraine and possibly a nuclear war. That's one possibility. So when you read a headline in a main journal in the United States saying, Russia delenda est, we must destroy Russia, what that is saying is, I want to kill everybody in Ukraine and I want to move on to a nuclear war which will end human life on Earth. That's one possibility. The alternative is to move towards a negotiated diplomatic settlement. Now, that kind of settlement will be ugly. That's a fact. It will have to offer President Putin some kind of escape hatch. If it doesn't offer an escape hatch, then when the hard men in Moscow have their backs to the wall and are said, there's nothing left for you, the only choice for them is to use all their power and do what I just described. So the settlement will have to have an escape hatch. And everyone knows pretty much what it is. It will have to be a settlement that agrees on the neutralization of Ukraine and some diplomatic finesse to put aside for the time being the status of Donbass and Crimea to be negotiated at a later state, and a ceasefire and withdrawal of troops. That's basically the framework, and it's understood on all sides. So those are the choices we have. Washington's position now is to fight to the last Ukrainian. It's not my words, I'm quoting one of the most astute and respected members of the diplomatic service, former ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Chas Freeman, Ambassador Chas Freeman. He's described in some detail US strategy, and in his words, it's fight to the last Ukrainian, but don't have a negotiated settlement. Don't offer a way out. That's US policy. Seems pretty much China's policy. That's one option. And of course, it's not just the last Ukrainian. It also means strong possibility of moving on to confrontation between major nuclear powers, which is essentially the end. There was a great opportunity at the end of the Cold War, and President Bush, first President Bush, H.W. Bush, actually pursued it. There were, Mikhail Gorbachev had presented his vision of a post-Cold War era. It would be a unified Eurasia from Lisbon to Vladivostok with no military alliances, what was called a common European home, actually bringing in, that was one option. President Bush's option was not that different. He did pursue what was called the Partnership for Peace. Ambassador Freeman, who I quoted, was instrumental in formulating this system. He was right at the heart of it. The Partnership for Peace didn't exclude NATO, but it had a limited relationship to it. So countries could join the Partnership for Peace without any connection to NATO. Tajikistan, for example, joined, no NATO connection, and it could have extended to include Russia in a general partnership for peace in which military alliances would erode and maybe disappear. That was one possibility. Well, Ambassador Freeman describes what happens. Worth reading his words. I'm sorry, I don't have them in front of me, so I'll have to paraphrase. What he said is that in 1994, when Bill Clinton became president, he started talking out of both sides of his mouth to the Russians. He said, partnership for peace. To the world, he said, we're going to expand NATO to the Russian border. He was bitterly condemned by Boris Yeltsin, again in 1996, when he expanded this picture. 1997, he invited Poland, Slovenia, Hungary into NATO, pushing NATO to the Russian border. This was in strict violation of a promise, firm commitment that President Bush had made to Gorbachev that NATO would not extend 1 inch to the east, meaning to the east of East Germany. And Bush lived up to that. Clinton did for a few years and then violated it. The Russians objected, but tolerated it. When George W. Bush came in, the second Bush, he threw it open to the wind, invited in a series of other former Russian satellites right to the Russian border. 2008, he even went further and invited Ukraine to join. Every American diplomat, George Kennan, Henry Kissinger, Jack Matlock, heads of the CIA, all of them understood very clearly that Georgia and Ukraine are red lines. The Russians will tolerate a lot, but not the entry of a hostile military alliance into their geostrategic heartland. No Russian leader would accept that. Not Yeltsin, not Gorbachev, no one. Nevertheless, W. Bush went ahead. That time it was vetoed by France and Germany. Could understand what that meant, but they went ahead anyway. By 1915, after the Maidan coup, the United States moved directly to begin pretty much to incorporate Ukraine loosely within NATO, military missions, arms, and so on. In September 2021, it's a few months ago, President Biden presented a formal policy statement, September 1st, 2001. It's worth reading. You can find it on the White House webpage. Wasn't reported in the United States, but I'm sure the Russians read it. It called for an enhancement program for NATO membership for Ukraine, called for new advanced weapons shipments to Ukraine, military maneuvers with the United States, training of Ukrainian military officers, and so on. We don't know, I don't know, but it could be that this was what finally induced Russia to make the dangerous criminal decision to go to direct invasion, possibly. But anyway, that's the background of what's been happening. And it leaves us now with two choices. The United States can continue with the policy statement of 2001, incorporating Ukraine slowly within NATO, joint military maneuvers, so on, which means destruction of Ukraine and probable terminal nuclear war, one possibility. The other possibility is to abandon that stance, to move in the direction that Emmanuel Macron was moving towards in his abortive discussions with Putin, towards something like, in the narrow sense, a political settlement that will allow Putin an escape. Ugly, but the only alternative for Ukraine and survival